At 3:47 a.m., a nurse couldn't pull a patient's allergy record. 3 minutes later, he coded, "My name is Nathan Kessler. I'm 41. For the last 9 years, I was the lead systems architect at WellPoint Logic. We built EMR platforms, electronic medical records for hospitals that didn't have budget for failure. That was always the measure. If a nurse in an ER can't access vitals in under 5 seconds, the system failed. Not the user, not the hardware, the system. I wasn't a founder, never held equity, didn't show up in funding decks or wear startup hoodies to panels. I wrote the part of the system that worked at 4 a.m. when no one else was watching. And when failure costs a life, the log came in through an old channel. A script I'd written years ago meant to stay silent unless something broke protocol. That morning it didn't scream, just blinked once. T to 12, access, failure, code 403, auth token rejected. It was from a small regional hospital in northern Arizona. 3 trauma bays, shared pharmacy with urgent care. The system hadn't crashed. It hadn't timed out. It had refused. I recognized the refusal immediately. It wasn't the first time I'd seen that signature. The last was 6 years ago. A different hospital. Same silence. That one stayed with me longer than the logs did. A teenage boy had come in. Bee sting. Throat already tightening. The nurse pulled up the tablet. His name returned nothing. She looked at the doctor and asked, "Do we treat blind?" They gave him epinephrine. He was allergic to the preservatives in the carrier. 6 minutes flatline. His chart had been there. It just hadn't synced in time. I rebuilt the entire access system after that. From scratch. No team, no ticket. Just necessity. I wrote a module that bypassed standard auth routes. Triggered only in triage scenarios when seconds mattered more than structure. I named it Access Route Emergency Only V4. No marketing name, no dashboard button, it just worked. That module became the one part of the system no one touched. Not because I asked them to, but because they didn't know it existed. When we signed our first real contract compliance reviews, legal onboarding, external counsel, I added a clause. Appendix C. No one read that far unless they were already in trouble. Clause 11.4. Emergency System Reversion. In the event of unjustified removal of the original author from operational oversight, emergency access modules shall revert to protected status pending formal reauthorization. It wasn't a threat, wasn't even bolded, just a sentence. I wrote it alone in the office after hours. The only thing on my desk was a cold coffee and a sticky note I kept in the drawer. The nurse from 6 years ago had written it after that night. Your system saved my shift the next night. Don't let anyone touch it. I never forgot the wording. She didn't say thank you. She said don't let them touch it. The system stayed solid for years. 12 hospitals, 4 clinics, no major outages, no fallback triggers. I stayed in the background. Didn't ask for stock. Didn't join board meetings. Didn't put my name on version updates. I just watched the logs. Growth came anyway. With it came the meetings, reorgs, new titles, and eventually Dana, our new COO. She walked into the first leadership sync with a tablet and a smile like she'd already solved the roadmap. She called me mission critical to the board. Then she took my name off the deployment queue the following week. I didn't argue. I just made a fresh copy of the original clause, printed it, folded it once, slid it into my laptop sleeve, and waited. If you've ever built something they tried to erase, you're not alone. Consider subscribing. Others like you are already here. The first time I saw someone freeze with a syringe in her hand, I knew I'd write something no investor would ever understand. It happened 6 years ago. Before WellPoint had a name, before we had an office, before the funding decks and pitch language. Back then I worked nights at a community clinic outside Flagstaff. We were always understaffed. We had paper charts, faded labels, smudged allergies on faxed forms. Sometimes no records at all, just guesswork. That night the guess went wrong. A teenage boy came in around 3 a.m. His throat was closing. Fast. The nurse searched his name on a tablet we'd just started using. Nothing came up, no history, no flags, no warnings. She hesitated, held a syringe in one hand, looked at the attending and whispered, "Do we treat blind?" The doctor nodded. They pushed epinephrine. The boy coded within seconds. Later, we learned he had a rare allergy, not to the epinephrine, but to a preservative used in the carrier fluid. It was noted in his chart. But the system hadn't synced. Staging server failure. Bad timing, no fallback. He flatlined for 6 minutes. Came back. But that moment never left me. 3 days later, I found a sticky note on my desk. The nurse had written it herself. "Your system saved my shift the next night. Don't let anyone touch it." That line stayed with me more than any uptime metric ever could. After that, I didn't sleep right until I rebuilt everything. No one told me to. No one reviewed my commits. I didn't wait for approval. I just stayed late, pushed lines of code like they were anchors, and slowly the fallback logic took shape. I designed it outside the primary stack. It ran its own thread. Ignored UI. Ignored load balancers. Ignored token structures. It didn't wait for permission. It only waited for triage tags. When flagged, it bypassed everything. No delays, no validation flows, no central queue. The logic was simple. If vitals fail to load, ignore protocol. Return record. I called the module Access Root Emergency Only v4. The version number was a lie. There had never been a v1, v2, or v3. I just wanted it to sound unimportant, unremarkable, forgettable to anyone who didn't know what it held. It became the system's quiet spine. When we started getting real attention compliance audits, Series A term sheets, lawyers reading our SOW line by line, I added something to the contract stack. It was late. Office lights off except for mine. I stayed behind while our general counsel reviewed documents for onboarding. He looked tired. Didn't ask many questions by that point. I slid over a single page. "Mind if we insert this in Appendix C?" He glanced down. Clause 11.4, Emergency System Reversion. In the event of unjustified removal of the original system author from operational access, emergency response modules revert to said author pending reauthorization. He blinked. "You think this'll ever come up?" I didn't answer immediately. Just looked at the wall clock. "It'll be late," I said, "and someone will be waiting for a screen to load." He nodded. We printed it, initialed, stamped. Archived without comment. Most people never read Appendix C, but I did. And I remembered exactly where the clause was filed. Page 13, bottom left. No formatting, no heading. Just one line, waitin'. The revenge wasn't written in anger. I wasn't bitter back then. Just aware. I'd already seen what happened when a system fails on its own. I wasn't going to let it fail because someone didn't like where the logic came from. So I put that line in the contract. Not as a sword, as a key. It didn't activate anything on its own. Didn't trigger rollbacks or auto-locks. It just gave the system permission to protect itself if I was ever removed unfairly. If the trust that built the fallback module was cut off, that was the condition. Not termination, not even restructuring. Just unjustified removal from operational oversight. I remember the night I finished coding the final part. The clinic was quiet. The halls smelled like ammonia and burnt coffee. I saved the file, looked at the sticky note again, taped it to the bottom of my monitor, and walked out. I didn't know when someone would try to replace what they didn't understand. But I knew someone eventually would. So I wrote a clause that wouldn't protect me. It would protect the system from them. The first thing Dana said to me was, "You're the ghost in the machine, right?" Then she smiled like she meant it as a compliment. She arrived 3 weeks after Series B closed. New COO. Fresh off a logistics tech acquisition and a Harvard MBA. Her bio used words like scale alignment and cross-functional synergy. Her wardrobe followed the same tone, pastel blazers, structured silhouettes, muted power. At our first leadership sync, she introduced herself by asking everyone in the room for one inefficiency we'd learned to tolerate. When it was my turn, I said nothing. She nodded, understood. Dana didn't talk fast. She talked efficiently. Every sentence closed like a slide deck bullet. She called me mission critical to the board. Then she reorganized the structure. DevOps moved under product. Compliance shifted to legal. Architecture, my domain, lost its box on the org chart. It became a subheader. Nobody said it out loud, but I knew what that meant. My calendar started thinning. Fewer reviews. No invites to infrastructure meetings. Pull access instead of push. Read-only permission on the core repo. There was no memo. No confrontation. Just subtle rollbacks of presence. Like someone turning down the volume of a song instead of stopping it. I didn't push back. I just watched. When someone breaks a thing they don't understand, they never do it all at once. They chip away. Small changes framed as progress, shifting control without calling it removal. It always starts with language. A new project manager asked in Slack whether anyone else could walk through the fallback logic. Said it felt undocumented. I didn't reply. He didn't ask again. 2 weeks later, I saw a ticket labeled Legacy Refactor, Phase 1. It referenced a routing file I'd written by hand. Inside the commit comments, a line stood out. We'll need to abstract this. Still too dependent on NK's module. That's when I knew the clause might matter. Not today. Maybe not for months. But they were moving toward it. The way you move towards something you think you understand, until you touch the wire. One afternoon, I walked past a glass meeting room. On the screen, my code. A junior dev was pointing at it with a laser. He said, "I think we can clean this up." Another voice replied, "Do we even know what this part does?" They all nodded like it didn't matter. I kept walking. Later that night, I sat alone in my office. The lights were motion sensitive, so I kept triggering them every few minutes. I wasn't working. Not really. Just watching. Watching the system run tests. Watching logs auto-rotate. Watching the fallback module ping its own silent health checks. Everything still worked. That was the part they didn't understand. It worked because no one touched it. The next day I printed a copy of the contract. Just the appendix, clause 11.4. I folded it in half, slipped it into the side pocket of my laptop sleeve. Didn't highlight anything. Didn't mark the page. If anyone asked, it was just another compliance doc. No one asked. The backup came later. I spun up a private mirror of the fallback module. Isolated, encrypted, not connected to prod, just in case. I didn't label it with my name. Didn't timestamp the folder. It was quiet, like the rest of my work. That's how it starts. Not with sabotage, not with a declaration. Just a sense, a shift, and a backup. I didn't get a termination notice. I got a calendar that stayed empty. It started with permissions. First push access quietly disappeared from the fallback repo. Then I lost review status on deployment queues. No ticket, no email, just absence. When I hovered over the permission badge in our internal system, it read only. Legacy reference. I didn't follow up, didn't raise a flag. They wanted it quiet. I let it be quiet. Next came the structural changes. DevOps was realigned, splintered into 2 agile groups under product. The justification was phrased in Dana's usual tone, to reduce friction and increase architectural agility. She said it like it had passed through 3 layers of HR curation. I was invited to the kickoff call. 30 minutes before it started, the invite disappeared. No explanation. Build reviews started happening without me. I noticed the log showed merged commits I hadn't seen before. New endpoint logic. Refactored routing layers. Not dangerous, but redundant. One of the junior engineers left a comment in a PR. "We'll rewrite fallback logic once legacy layer is deprecated." I archived the message. Didn't respond. My desk was moved. They said the other wing had better HVAC. Said I'd appreciate the quieter space. It was closer to the server room. No windows. No one passed by unless they were avoiding someone else. I didn't unpack. A week later, I noticed something small. One of the fallback routing health checks failed. Not on production. On a staging instance tied to a new interface component. The module didn't respond. Didn't crash either. It just ignored the token. That's when I remembered something I'd written into the logic months ago. Fallback doesn't respond to new credentials. It only responds to trust. Trust wasn't a permission, it was embedded. A signature in the fallback architecture. An invisible handshake. If the pattern of system access changed too far from baseline fallback, disengaged. No error, no alert, just absence. They wouldn't even notice unless someone checked the deep logs. I checked. The routing node had entered passive mode. Waiting. That's what fallback was built to do. It didn't fight, it waited. It waited until someone touched the wrong line. The week after that, Dana gave a presentation to the board. I wasn't invited, but I read the notes. She described our architecture as heavy with inherited dependencies, said we were migrating toward modular clarity. I scanned the bullet points. 2 of them referenced emergency access logic. Neither mentioned me. I wasn't surprised. They wanted the code, not the context. But fallback had both. Someone from product asked in passing if we had a clean spec for emergency routing. I said it wasn't spec-based, that it ran on conditions, not configuration. He nodded like he understood. He didn't follow up. One night I checked the fallback logs again. No failures, no requests, but the trust counters had dipped. 3 internal tools had attempted token refresh on the module, all rejected. No rollback needed. Fallback wasn't broken, it was watching. By then, most of my meetings had disappeared. Architecture became a bullet on a Confluence page. Fallback became a legend no one wanted to verify. A quiet asset, until it wasn't. I didn't warn them, didn't offer training. The system was already doing what it was meant to do. Observe, protect, wait. That Friday, I walked past a meeting room. Dana was inside. The screen showed a flowchart. I couldn't read the text, but I saw one box circled in red. It was labeled, Legacy Routing Replaceable. Someone was pointing at it with a pen. I kept walking. That night, I cloned a fresh copy of the legal archive. Just the parts that mattered. Clause 11.4, not highlighted, not marked. Just printed, folded, filed. The original was still in my laptop sleeve. Now I had a backup. They didn't revoke my badge, didn't reassign my title, didn't say a word. But the system knew. It had already changed modes. And they didn't even realize what they were stepping on. They touched the wrong line. It wasn't even a real function. Just a line of text buried in a helper file. But it was the one thing they shouldn't have touched. The commit came in on a Friday afternoon. Timestamp 1647. User J. Lindsay Dev. Message. Removed deprecated legacy references for clarity. NK fallback route. I saw it in the update feed. Didn't get a notification. Just happened to be watching. The change itself looked harmless. 1 file modified. 3 lines deleted. One of them wasn't even executable. But I recognized it. It was a marker. A redirect that didn't do anything on its own. Just pointed to a path. Access route our emergency only v4.js. The actual logic wasn't called from there. That file didn't even sit inside the routing engine anymore. But that line, that one redirect, it was the fallback's handshake. A trace it used to confirm that its own presence hadn't been tampered with. I opened the diff, read the deletion slowly, then opened my laptop, ran a silent query on the fallback node, pulled the handshake status. Status missing. I didn't type anything else, didn't leave a comment, didn't message the dev. Just closed the terminal and sat still. Fallback didn't throw errors. It wasn't built that way. The absence of the handshake wasn't treated as a bug. It was treated as a condition. And the system had a protocol for that. A quiet one. Within 2 minutes of that commit merging, fallback disengaged. It didn't crash. It didn't reroute. It didn't alert any dashboards. It simply stopped listening to external tokens. Stopped syncing with UI commands. Stopped validating external override requests. Routing stayed green, logs kept writing, but underneath the emergency layer was gone. They wouldn't notice immediately. The module wasn't used in day-to-day flows. It only activated in triage, in chaos, in moments when everything else stopped working. But now, fallback would no longer answer those moments. Not until it could re-verify authorship. Not until it could trust again. The reversion protocol was designed for this. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't punitive. It was constitutional. Like a failsafe that assumed something went wrong and simply waited for the signal to return. I checked the internal audit layer. A line had been logged. Fallback. Handshake marker not detected. Initiating soft isolation. No one would see it unless they went looking. And no one was looking. They thought they'd cleaned up legacy. What they'd really done was break the contract. I made a copy of the commit, archived it to my private node. No encryption needed, just text. The line they deleted didn't belong to the code base. It belonged to the clause. By Monday, fallback would be running in lockdown. Not offline, not failed, just absent. Unavailable until reauthorization. And the only thing that could unlock it, Clause 11.4. It hadn't been triggered by design. Not by sabotage. Not by protest. Just a developer trying to clean up something he didn't understand. Trying to make the repo look nicer. Trying to erase fingerprints. I didn't blame him. I didn't blame anyone. Because fallback wasn't built to protect me. It was built to protect itself. And that's what it was doing now. Not loudly, not with warnings, but quietly, decisively, line by line. I watched the log for another 30 seconds. Then I whispered, that one line wasn't a function. It was a lock. It wasn't even a real failure. That's what made it worse. They were running a standard test. Simulated node outage. Basic QA script to verify our systems could reroute cleanly in the event of emergency downtime. A red team dry run. It wasn't even public-facing. Just an internal resilience check. A routine. Every system passed except fallback. The fallback node didn't crash, didn't return error codes, didn't do anything. No status change, no reroute. It just sat there, waiting. From the outside, it looked like the system failed. But it didn't. It was just following protocol. The QA channel lit up in Slack. 12 pings in 5 minutes. Why is fallback not responding failover, not engaging? No errors returned. Node online but unresponsive. Need logs. I stayed silent. Watched the thread unfold. Someone from DevOps tried a manual trigger. Didn't work. Someone else tried an override. Still nothing. Dana entered the thread at 10:12 a.m. Escalating. Emergency sync in 15. Nathan join. That was the first time she addressed me directly in weeks. I clicked yes. Didn't type a word. The sync call had 9 people on it. 3 from QA, 2 from infrastructure. Dana. 1 legal rep. 1 project manager. And me. I kept my mic muted, camera off. They started by reviewing the incident logs. Fallback node registered no alerts, no exceptions, no downtime. Just silence. Someone tried to explain it away. Could be a heartbeat bug. Maybe a timestamp drift. Someone else pushed back. No, the module didn't even acknowledge test input. Another voice. Was this tied to any recent permissions change? Silence. Dana looked calm, but her tone clipped. We need root access into the fallback logic. One of the DevOps leads said, routes restricted. Even our admin override doesn't get through. She didn't like that answer. I finally unmuted. Just once. Spoke plainly. Has anyone touched the legacy routing helpers in the last 2 weeks? The room went still. A long pause. Then someone mumbled, there was a cleanup commit last Friday. Just removed a dead redirect. Another voice. It wasn't even functional. I nodded. Didn't follow up. Didn't explain. Dana leaned forward. Nathan, is that relevant? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at the incident log again. Scrolled to the system handshake sequence. Still blank. Still waiting. Then I looked back at the call and said, fallback responds to trust. That's all. No one replied. The call ended 5 minutes later. No resolution. Just a note to investigate deeper. But I knew it wouldn't matter. The handshake was broken. Fallback had entered soft lockdown. And no one, not even Dana, could talk to it now. It was never about blocking them. It was about watching what they did without knowing what it meant. And now they were standing in front of a locked door without realizing they'd melted the key. If you've made it this far, you might want to hear how it ends. Subscribe to hear the next part when it drops. When systems fail, people look for someone to blame. When fallback fails, there's only silence. The Monday thread turned toxic by Tuesday. QA blamed DevOps for running tests outside the allowed window. DevOps blamed legacy logic for not adhering to standardized signals. Product asked why fallback didn't return any warnings. Security flagged the absence of audit trails. None of it mattered. Fallback wasn't listening. Dana issued a company-wide memo at 11:43 a.m. We are aware of inconsistencies in emergency reroute behaviors. Fallback is temporarily out of spec and under internal review. Do not attempt to bypass or relaunch manually. The message was polished, corporate sanitized. But even she didn't know what out of spec meant here. The truth was simpler. The system was doing exactly what it was designed to do, just not for them. By Wednesday, Marcus called me. He was one of the few engineers I respected. Not because he was brilliant, but because he listened. Old school. Didn't overtalk. He pinged me with a single message. Got 5 minutes just trying to understand. I didn't answer, not right away. Instead, I pulled up the contract archive. Clause 11.4 wasn't hidden. It sat dead center in the Emergency Systems Logic Custody section. But no one had ever read that far. It didn't affect day-to-day dev. Didn't block sprint planning. Didn't touch funding cycles. Until it did. I opened the PDF, scrolled to the exact line. In the event of ambiguous control loss or routing modification without express co-signature from the clause author, the fallback node shall default to trust-neutral isolation mode, pending reauthorization under original credentials or notarized custodian override. Legal language heavy, but fallback didn't read it like a lawyer. It read it like a trigger. I didn't respond to Marcus with a meeting. No voice call, no Slack thread. Just an email, no subject line. Only a file attachment clause. 11.44 PDF. No text in the body. 3 minutes later, he replied, "This is real." I didn't answer. He didn't follow up. He didn't need to. Later that evening, I made a copy of the original contract from the day fallback was launched. Not the one legal kept in the shared repository. The one I notarized and stored offline. Signed, time-stamped, registered under my name and project hash. I moved it to an encrypted folder on a remote node I still controlled. A node no one knew existed. The key was a SHA-512 derived passphrase from a string no one could guess. Because it wasn't random. It was the date fallback first saved a patient's life. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done. No announcement. No warning. But the lock was set, and the system knew who held the key. By Thursday, fallback remained dark. No alerts, no malfunctions. Just unavailable. Support logged it as intermittent instability. The board was told we were resolving temporary redundancy overlap. Some VP floated the idea of rebuilding the module entirely. No one asked me. No one questioned why it had disengaged in the first place. They just assumed it broke. But fallback didn't break. It remembered. They hadn't read the fine print. But fallback had. The first real consequence didn't happen in a server room. It happened in an ER. A rural hospital in Nebraska. Tier 2 partner site. They'd been running our EMR system for 9 months without issue. Then on a Tuesday morning, a 34-year-old man came in post-crash. Unconscious. No ID. No known allergies. They scanned his face. Match found he was in our system, but his record was archived. Normally, fallback would activate, bridge the gap, pull the last synced emergency record. This time it didn't. The attending physician tried again. System returned authorization pending. They escalated. Called central support. Support tried admin override. Nothing. On the back end, fallback showed green. No errors, no alerts. Just disconnected. The patient was treated blind. He made it, barely, but they logged a formal risk report. Flagged us for non-compliance. The email reached Dana at 6:12 p.m. Subject urgent, emergency access failure. Patient impact confirmed. She read it 4 times. Then called another all hands. The sync room was quieter this time. Fewer people. Fewer confident voices. Dana looked tired. Not defeated, but smaller. Why didn't fallback engage? No one had an answer. One DevOps lead said, maybe the redirect node was still unlinked from the earlier test. Someone from QA whispered. We thought that was resolved. Legal was there now. They said nothing. I waited, then leaned into the mic. There's a clause for this. Just that. No details, no explanation. Dana turned to me. What clause? I didn't speak. I just looked at legal. After a beat, the junior counsel, Jared, I think jotted something down. Later that night, I got a message from Jared. Do you mind pointing me to the clause you mentioned? I didn't reply. Just resent the same PDF. Clause 11.4. No commentary. 20 minutes later, he sent back, is this enforceable? I didn't reply. He didn't ask again. The next morning, fallback was still silent. No change. But legal was active. I could see the doc revision history in our compliance portal. Someone had pulled the contract metadata, checked hashes, timestamp logs. Clause 11.4 wasn't hidden. It wasn't redacted. It was just Ignored. Until now. They started to understand what trust-neutral isolation meant. No sabotage, no hack, just no consent. Dana emailed me privately. First time since my system access had been downgraded. Can we talk? I didn't answer. There was nothing left to talk about. The system didn't respond to her anymore. And I didn't either. This wasn't a power play. It wasn't about vengeance. Not really. Fallback had one principle: protect the patient. And one protocol: verify the hand that touches it. They thought they owned the logic. They didn't understand the trust model. I didn't design Fallback to resist takeover. I designed it to ask one silent question. Are you still who you said you were? They'd failed to answer, so it stopped listening. It was never about control. It was about consent. When control slips away, they start using softer words: partnership, alignment, collaboration. But it's never about fixing the system. It's about regaining control. On Thursday morning, I got a calendar invite from Dana's assistant. Subject: strategic re-engagement, internal only duration, 25 minutes, attendees. Dana Whitmore, Jared Holtz, legal me. I didn't decline. I didn't accept. I let it hang. An hour later, Dana emailed directly. Nathan, this isn't disciplinary. We're just looking for a path forward that respects your role in the architecture. The system needs you. She copied no one. Tone conciliatory, language softened. But the subtext was desperation. Fallback was still dark. Now 4 partner hospitals had reported record access errors. 3 clinical trials were paused. The silent failover didn't trigger, but also didn't warn. Legal was getting nervous. Operations couldn't explain it. Investors were noticing. At 2:07 p.m., Jared sent a follow-up. Hi, Nathan. To be transparent, we're open to restoring your contributor rights under a revised framework. We'd also consider formal acknowledgement of Clause 11.4's operational weight and future co-signatures for fallback modifications. Let's discuss terms. I read it twice, then deleted it. At 4:44 p.m., Dana tried one more time. No corporate speak. Just one line. Can we please fix this together? I responded. It's not about access. It's about the foundation. That was all. By Friday morning, Fallback still hadn't re-engaged. The error logs remained clean. No faults, no breaches. Just no handshake. Then the audit started. Not internal, not HR. Investor triggered. They'd seen the hospital errors. Someone had flagged the Fallback failures during a quarterly oversight sync. Too many red lines, too little explanation. They hired a third-party firm. Cyber Legal. Ex-military compliance officers and contractual system analysts. Their mandate: trace Fallback behavior from first implementation through current blackout. Timeline scope: 7 years, starting from the first commit, my commit. They didn't call me in. They didn't have to. Everything was already logged. Every Fallback handshake, every authentication map, every clause pull from runtime conditions. All of it time-stamped, all of it clean. The audit team wasn't looking for sabotage. They were looking for liability. And Fallback's logs were pristine. The system had done exactly what it was built to do: refuse unknown authority. Late that afternoon, one of the auditors, I never caught his name, emailed me directly. Reviewing your documentation. We may request a technical brief on Fallback's trust schema. I didn't reply. He didn't press. I sat back, watched the logs, watched the company swirl. Dana had gone quiet again. Legal was drowning in their own language. And the investors, they were starting to realize they hadn't lost code. They'd lost credibility. They wanted access. What they needed was accountability. They called it a failure, then a bug, then a misalignment. But Fallback never changed. Only the people around it did. The audit team released their first memo at 6:43 a.m. Confidential. Internal eyes only. 4 pages, bullet points, timeline analysis. Subject line: trust path breach, preliminary findings. I wasn't on the CC list, but someone forwarded it anyway. Line 3 stood out. All modifications to trust routing logic occurred after contributor ID and Kessler lost right access to the production branch. It wasn't highlighted. It didn't need to be. Dana tried to deflect. She told the auditors Fallback was legacy code, said it hadn't been maintained properly, blamed documentation drift. Then she pointed to a junior dev. A name I didn't recognize. Someone 2 months in. Apparently, they had merged a helper script update without understanding the embedded handshake logic. That part was true, but no one forced them. No one reviewed it either. The auditors weren't interested in excuses. They tracked the hashes, followed the commit trails. Every permission change was time-stamped. And the logs spoke louder than anyone in that building. Clause 11.4 stopped being obscure around noon. That's when Jared from legal called me. Again. Nathan, we've reevaluated the clause. The language is stricter than we thought. I didn't reply. He followed up 5 minutes later. Just to clarify, were you the sole author of the fallback trust handshake? Still nothing. By 2 p.m. someone leaked the internal report. It made its way onto Slack. Not the whole thing, just one sentence. Fallback behaved exactly as designed. 8 words. No modifiers, no hedging. By 3:15, the dev channels were quiet. No memes, no emojis, just silence. I checked my inbox. 4 new invites, all from names I hadn't heard in years. VP of Engineering, Deputy CTO, Infrastructure Audit, External Counsel. I archived them all. In the background, fallback kept running. Silent, unaffected, unreadable to anyone who hadn't written it. I didn't need to defend myself. The system had already testified. At 5:42 p.m., I opened my private log, the one I'd maintained since the first trust pairing routine. Encrypted, local only. I added one line. Redemption not needed. System already testified. Then I closed the file. No backups, no screenshots. Just one more entry in a trail they were too late to follow. They wanted to make it personal. But fallback didn't care about ego. It cared about architecture. It was never personal. It was protocol. They kept saying my name, but I wasn't on the call. The investor briefing was supposed to last 45 minutes. It went for 2 hours and 17. Someone leaked the transcript. They tried to redact names. They failed. Dana opened the call with a calm voice. She thanked everyone for their time. Said the transition had revealed some unexpected technical dependencies. One investor interrupted her mid-sentence. Was fallback intentionally disabled? She said it was a misfire. Another voice jumped in. Why does clause 11.4 contain the phrase, sovereign override key requires trust path validation? Who wrote that? Silence. Then a name. Mine. I wasn't watching live, didn't need to. The quote spread through private Slack groups like wildfire. Most were confused. Some were angry. A few just posted the same sentence. This wasn't a bug. It was a boundary. Around 5:30 p.m., a VP of Technical Infrastructure resigned. Internal email. Forwarded 6 times. Subject loss of engineering integrity. He didn't blame anyone. Just wrote, I can't stand behind a stack where trust is considered optional. No one replied. By evening, messages started trickling into my inbox. Old devs, people I hadn't spoken to in years. No apologies, no explanations. Just log snippets. A thumbs up. One simply said, it held. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened my log. Same encrypted file. Same clean interface. I added one line. No reset required. Then closed it again. They thought removing me would simplify things. But they forgot what I left behind. Not revenge, not sabotage. Just truth. Written in code. Executed by time. That night, fallback's status stayed gray. No heartbeat, no error. Just one silent signal pulsing in the background. Waiting. Dana didn't call again. Neither did legal. There was nothing left to negotiate. Nothing they could offer. The system had made its point. It didn't shout. It just held. By morning, the board scheduled an emergency session. Someone whispered that Dana wouldn't be attending. I didn't smile. Didn't even nod. I just let the next log cycle run. Same as always. They spent millions trying to fix the issue. But fallback wasn't broken. It just didn't trust them. Let the silence finish the job. A week passed. Fallback never came back online. No press release, no formal update, just silence. In the absence of trust, the system stayed quiet. And that quiet was louder than any breach. They patched around it. Some temporary failovers. A few third-party monitoring layers. One offshore firm brought in for interim observability. Nothing worked the same. It wasn't failing. It just wasn't responding. Dana didn't come back. No memo. No final call. Someone else took her calendar. Her Slack icon stayed gray. Eventually, HR sent a vague message about executive realignment. No one replied. I went back once. The building still smelled like floor polish and startup ambition. I passed 2 interns by the coffee machine. One wore a badge that still had the old logo. He looked up. Are you the guy who wrote the clause? I nodded. Didn't explain. Didn't need to. He didn't ask anything else. Just went back to pouring his coffee. My office was mostly untouched, except the chair had changed, and the blinds had been drawn. I didn't sit. I just reached for the old notebook on the shelf. Black cover, no label. Taped on the inside flap was a sticky note. Not a message, just a version number. V1.0, trusted only. I didn't smile, didn't frown, just closed the cover. I walked past the security desk. Same guy as always. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. I walked out with nothing but the notebook. No badge, no laptop, no revenge. Just the record. The system still ran. Of course it did. Data still flowed. APIs still answered. Uptime still posted. But it wasn't clean. The logic was patchworked. The alerts were silenced. The trust pathways fractured. I didn't watch them struggle. I didn't watch the stock drop. Or read the board statement. Or respond to the journalists who poked at clause 11.4 like it was a riddle. Let them guess. Let them debate how a single fallback could hold an entire infrastructure hostage without lifting a finger. Let them wonder why. I wasn't angry, not anymore. That left the day they took my push access. What stayed was something else. Stillness, design, proof. I never wrote fallback to punish. I wrote it to protect, not the system, but the people inside it. The intent. The ones who stayed late because they cared. Who reviewed the logs even when no one asked. Who didn't hard-code shortcuts for speed. People like me before they forgot I existed. They called it a kill switch. It wasn't. It was a truth switch, and they flipped it themselves. All I did was listen. The system told the story better than I ever could. Every log, every deleted redirect, every override attempt without trust signature. It remembered. I didn't need redemption. Didn't need reinstatement. Didn't even need them to say they were wrong. I just needed them to feel what happens when intent is no longer welcome. And now they had. I left the notebook in a drawer at home. Haven't opened it since. Not because I'm done, but because it already served its purpose. The system held, the silence testified, and I just stepped away. Fallback doesn't protect systems. It protects intent. If this story stayed with you, consider subscribing for the next one.